When the flames reached toward heaven that October night, they carried with them the scent of burning dreams and the desperate prayers of a woman who had already lost everything once before. The smoke rolled thick across the valley like God's own judgment, and through it came the thunder of hoofbeats, not the gentle rhythm of a working horse, but the urgent drumbeat of a man racing against time itself. You can almost taste the ash on your tongue, feel the heat pressing against your face as the orange glow painted the darkness in shades of hell. Isabel Rosewood pressed her back against the rough-hewn logs of her cabin wall, the wood already warm beneath her palms. The acrid smell of burning cedar filled her nostrils, mixing with the metallic taste of fear that coated her throat. 3 years she'd built this life from nothing. 3 years since the fever took her Samuel, leaving her with calloused hands, a stubborn heart, and a determination that could weather any storm. But fire was different. Fire didn't negotiate. "Please," she whispered to the darkness beyond the flames, though she knew not what she asked for, nor from whom. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles through treacherous canyon country. The nearest town, Salvation Creek, might as well have been on the moon. The blaze had started in the barn. She'd seen the first hungry tongues licking at the hay she'd worked so hard to gather for winter. Now it spread with a vicious appetite, consuming her chicken's roost, her vegetable garden, the little wooden cross Samuel had carved for their front door. Everything she'd built with her own 2 hands, disappearing into smoke and memory. Through the window, she caught sight of her mare, Prudence, rearing against the fence post where she'd tied her. The animal's eyes rolled white with terror, and Isabel's heart clenched. She'd have to choose soon, stay and burn, or run and lose everything to the flames anyway. That's when she heard it. Not the crackle of burning wood or the frightened whinny of her horse, but something else entirely. Hoofbeats, coming hard and fast through the smoke. "Could be raiders," she muttered, checking the load in Samuel's old rifle. The men who'd been trouble in these parts lately wouldn't think twice about finishing what the fire started. But something in the rhythm of those hooves spoke of urgency, not malice. The rider emerged from the smoke like a vision from a fever dream. Tall in the saddle, his black coat streaming behind him, a kerchief pulled up over his nose and mouth. For a moment, silhouetted against the flames, he looked like death himself come calling. Then he dismounted, and she saw the way he moved, fluid, purposeful, without the swagger of a man bent on harm. "Ma'am," his voice carried clear over the roar of the fire. "Ma'am, are you in there?" Isabel's breath caught. She knew that voice, had heard it just once before, 3 months ago at the Salvation Creek Mercantile, when he'd stepped aside to let her pass and tipped his hat like she was somebody worth respecting. Most folks in town looked through her like she was made of glass, but this man had seen her. Really seen her, Garrett Stoneheart. The name carried weight in these parts, and not just because of the cattle spread that stretched from the foothills to the river. Money was one thing, but respect was another entirely, and Garrett had earned both through hard work and fair dealing. The kind of man who paid his debts and kept his word, even when it cost him. "I'm here," she called back, her voice cracking, with smoke and something else, relief, maybe, or the first flutter of hope she'd felt since the flames began their terrible feast. He didn't hesitate. While other men might have circled, looking for a safe way in, Garrett Stoneheart walked straight toward the fire. The flames parted before him like he carried some ancient protection, and through the dancing orange light, she saw his eyes, steady, determined, and fixed on her face like she was the only thing that mattered in the world. "Windows," he shouted. She shook her head. "Sealed tight for winter. Doors blocked. Burning timber fell across it." He nodded once, then did something that would live in her memory forever. He pulled off his coat, dunked it in the horse trough that hadn't yet caught fire, and wrapped it around himself like armor. Then he walked straight into the flames. The heat was ungodly. You could feel it from here, pressing against your skin like a living thing. But Garrett pushed through, his boots steady on the burning porch boards, his shoulders set with the kind of determination that moved mountains. When the front wall began to buckle, he didn't flinch. When a burning beam crashed down beside him, he kept walking. "Stand back," he called, and then his shoulder hit the door. The wood splintered. The burning timber rolled away. And there he stood, silhouetted against the flames, his hand extended toward her like a bridge across hell itself. "Trust me," he said, and those 2 words carried more weight than any poetry ever written. Isabel looked at his face, strong-jawed, weathered by sun and wind, but kind. The kind of face that made promises and kept them. The kind of man who walked through fire for a woman he barely knew, asking nothing in return but trust. She took his hand. The world exploded into heat and light and the sound of burning dreams. His arms came around her, strong and sure, and she felt herself lifted, carried, protected against the chaos that wanted to claim her. Through the smoke and flame they moved, his body shielding hers, his heartbeat steady against her cheek. But as they reached the edge of safety, as the cool night air touched her face again, she heard something that made her blood run cold. The distant sound of rifle fire, coming from the direction of town. The rifle shots echoed across the valley like the devil's own calling card, and Garrett's arms tightened around Isabel as they both turned toward the sound. In the distance, orange light flickered against the night sky, not the wild, consuming blaze of her cabin, but the controlled burn of torches. Too many torches for comfort. Trouble in town, Garrett muttered, his voice rough from smoke. He set her down gently, his hands lingering on her shoulders as if to steady her, or perhaps to steady himself. "Ma'am, I need to ask you something, and I need the truth." Isabel brushed ash from her singed skirt, her fingers trembling, not from the fire, but from the way he looked at her. Like she mattered. Like her answer could change everything. "What is it? Did you set that fire yourself?" The question hit her like a physical blow. She stumbled backward, her hand flying to her chest. "How could you? Why would you think?" "Because someone's been burning out homesteaders all summer," he said quietly, his eyes never leaving her face. "And because there's $1,000 bounty on your head, dead or alive." The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Isabel felt the world tilt sideways, felt her knees threaten to buckle. "That's impossible. I haven't done anything, haven't you?" His voice was gentle, but his eyes were sharp. "Haven't you been asking questions about the railroad surveys? Haven't you been talking to other homesteaders about organizing against the land grabs?" She had. God help her, she had. After Samuel died, she'd thrown herself into fighting for what was right, what was fair. The railroad wanted to buy up the valley for a song, push out the small farmers and homesteaders who'd built lives here with their own sweat and blood. She'd written letters, organized meetings, stood up in church to speak her mind about justice and fair dealing. "That doesn't make me an arsonist," she whispered. "No," he agreed, "but it makes you dangerous to the right people. People with money and influence. People who don't mind painting you as a villain to get what they want." The rifle fire erupted. Again, closer now, and Garrett's hand moved instinctively to his gun. "We need to move. My horse can carry us both, but not far. There's a line shack up in the canyon. I'm not running." The words came out harder than she intended, sharpened by 3 years of standing alone, of fighting for every scrap of respect and dignity. "This is my land. My home. What's left of it? Your home's gone, Miss Rosewood." His voice carried a gentleness that made her chest tight. "And if we don't move soon, you'll be gone too." She looked back at the burning remains of her cabin, at the life she'd built crumbling into ash and ember. Prudence whinnied from where she'd broken free of her tether, her eyes still wild with fear. Everything she'd worked for, everything she'd loved, disappearing into the night. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why did you come? Why risk yourself for someone you barely know?" Garrett was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the flames. When he spoke, his words were measured, careful. "Because 3 months ago, I watched you stand up to Cyrus Blackwood in the Mercantile. Watched you tell him exactly what you thought of his generous offer to buy your land. And I thought, here's a woman with spine. Here's someone worth knowing. Cyrus Blackwood." The name sent ice through her veins. The railroad's man in Salvation Creek, the one who'd been making rounds to all the homesteaders with his smooth talk and hard eyes. The one who'd promised that things would go easier for those who sold willingly. "He's behind this," she said, certainty settling over her like a cold blanket. "The bounty, the accusations, most likely, but proving it's another matter entirely." Garrett's jaw tightened. "Blackwood's got the sheriff in his pocket, half the town council too. You speak against him, you might as well be speaking into the wind. Then what do you suggest? Hide in the mountains like some common outlaw?" I suggest you stay alive long enough to figure out how to fight back. He moved closer, close enough that she could see the firelight reflected in his eyes, could smell the smoke and leather and something else, something warm and distinctly male that made her pulse quicken. And I suggest you let me help you. Why? She asked again, because she needed to understand. In her experience, men didn't offer help without expecting something in return. What's in it for you? His smile was small, sad. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. Maybe I'm just tired of watching good people get ground down by men who think money gives them the right to take whatever they want. The sound of approaching hoofbeats cut through the night air, not the urgent rhythm of a single rider, but the steady drumbeat of multiple horses moving in formation. Garrett's hand closed around her wrist, his grip urgent but gentle. "Time's up," he said. "Trust me or don't, but make your choice now." Isabel looked toward the sound of the approaching riders, then back at Garrett's face. She thought about Samuel, about the promises they'd made to each other, about the life they'd planned to build in this valley. She thought about the letters she'd written, the meetings she'd organized, the hope she'd tried to kindle in her neighbors' hearts. And she thought about the man standing before her, who'd walked through fire to save her, who spoke of justice and fairness like they were more than just pretty words. "There's something you should know," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "About the railroad surveys, about what I've been doing. It's not just organizing and letter writing." Garrett's eyes sharpened. "What do you mean?" "I mean I found something. Documents. Proof that Blackwood and his people have been falsifying survey reports, claiming land that doesn't belong to them. That's why they want me gone. Not because I'm organizing resistance, but because I can prove they're stealing." The hoofbeats were closer now, close enough that she could see the flicker of torches through the trees. Garrett's face went hard, his expression shifting from concern to something sharper, more dangerous. "Where are these documents?" "Hidden. Safe. But not for long if, ma'am." The voice cut through the night like a blade. "Isabella Rosewood. Come out with your hands visible." Sheriff Morton's voice. Blackwood's voice, speaking through the law's mouth. Isabel felt her heart sink, felt the trap closing around her like iron jaws. "Go," she whispered to Garrett. "You don't need to be part of this." But he was already moving, his hand sliding to his gun, his body shifting to shield her from the approaching riders. "Like hell I don't." The first torchbearer emerged from the smoke, then another, then half a dozen more. Sheriff Morton sat his horse like a man who'd rather be anywhere else, his face grim in the flickering light. Behind him rode Blackwood's men, hard faces, harder eyes, the kind of men who asked questions with their fists. "Miss Rosewood," Sheriff Morton called, his voice carrying reluctant authority. "You're under arrest for arson and destruction of property. You need to come with us." "Property that belonged to her," Garrett said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that made men listen. "Last I checked, a woman's got the right to burn down her own cabin if she's of a mind to." Morton's eyes flicked to Garrett, and something like relief crossed his features. "Mr. Stoneheart, didn't expect to see you here. Didn't expect to be here. But sometimes a man finds himself in places he never planned to be." Garrett's hand rested easy on his gun, but his eyes were hard as winter stone, especially when he sees innocent folks being railroaded by men who think a badge gives them the right to ignore justice. "Now see here," one of Blackwood's men started, but Morton raised a hand. "Easy, Pike. Mr. Stoneheart, I've got a warrant for Miss Rosewood's arrest. You know I have to serve it. Do you?" Garrett's voice was quiet, dangerous. "Or do you have to do what Cyrus Blackwood tells you to do?" The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. In the distance, Isabel could hear the crackle of dying flames, the nervous shifting of horses, the whisper of wind through the canyon. She could feel the weight of decisions hanging in the air, could sense the moment balanced on a knife's edge, and then Pike's hand dropped to his gun, and the night exploded into chaos that Garrett's gun cleared leather before Pike's hand even touched his holster. The sound of metal sliding against metal cut through the night like a prayer and a threat combined, and suddenly every man in that clearing was calculating distances, angles, and the cost of drawing breath. "Easy now," Garrett said, his voice steady as bedrock. "No need for anyone to do something they'll regret." Pike's hand froze halfway to his weapon, his eyes flicking between Garrett's drawn gun and Sheriff Morton's uncertain face. The torch flames danced in the silence, casting wild shadows that made every man look like a demon or a saint, depending on the angle of the light. "This is getting out of hand," Morton said, but his voice lacked conviction. You could hear the weight of his position pressing down on him, caught between the law he'd sworn to uphold and the money that kept food on his table. "Mr. Stoneheart, I don't want trouble with you." "Then don't bring it," Garrett replied. "Miss Rosewood hasn't done anything wrong, and you know it. I know she's been stirring up trouble about the railroad." Pike snarled, his hand still hovering near his gun. "I know she's been filling folks' heads with lies about Mr. Blackwood's business." "What lies?" Isabel stepped forward, her fear transformed into something harder, more dangerous. "The lie that he's been falsifying survey reports? The lie that he's been stealing land from honest homesteaders? Or the lie that he's been burning out anyone who won't sell?" Pike's face went dark. "Careful, lady. Words like that can get a person hurt. Is that a threat?" Garrett's voice dropped to a whisper, but it carried the promise of violence. "Because if you're threatening a lady in my presence, we're going to have a problem." The tension stretched tight as a fiddle string, and Isabel could feel the moment trembling on the edge of bloodshed. Then Sheriff Morton raised his hand, and everyone froze. "Enough," he said, and for a moment, he sounded like the man he might have been before Blackwood's money started weighing down his conscience. "Pike, back off. Mr. Stoneheart, holster your weapon. Miss Rosewood, you're still under arrest, but I give you my word, not Blackwood's, that you'll get a fair hearing." "Your word?" Isabel laughed, but there was no humor in it. "When was the last time your word meant anything, Sheriff? When was the last time you made a decision that wasn't bought and paid for?" Morton's face went pale, and for a moment, she thought she saw something like shame flicker in his eyes. "Ma'am, you what? You're sorry? You're just following orders." She took another step forward, and despite the guns and the threats and the flames still burning in the distance, she felt stronger than she had in months. "Let me tell you something about following orders, Sheriff. My Samuel followed orders when he enlisted. Followed them right into a fever tent in some godforsaken camp, and followed them right into his grave." The words hung in the air like smoke. Morton's hand trembled on his reins, and Pike shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. But Isabel wasn't finished. "After Samuel died, I could have followed orders too. Could have sold this land for whatever pittance Blackwood offered, packed up my things, and disappeared like a good little widow. But I didn't. You know why?" "Why?" Morton asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Because some things are worth fighting for. Because some lies are too big to swallow. And because I found something that proves Blackwood's been stealing from every honest family in this valley." Pike's hand dropped to his gun again, but this time Garrett was ready. His Colt appeared in his hand like magic, the barrel pointed steady at Pike's chest. "I wouldn't," Garrett said quietly. "I surely wouldn't." "What did you find?" Morton asked. And now there was something else in his voice. Curiosity, maybe, or the first stirring of conscience. Isabel looked at Garrett, saw the trust in his eyes, the willingness to stand with her against whatever came next. She thought about the documents hidden in Samuel's old Bible, about the survey reports that showed land boundaries drawn and redrawn to suit Blackwood's needs. She thought about the families who'd lost their homes, the dreams that had been bought and sold like cattle. "Survey reports," she said finally. "The real ones, not the ones Blackwood filed with the territorial office. Maps showing the actual boundaries, not the ones he's been claiming. And correspondence, letters between Blackwood and his surveyors, discussing how to adjust the findings." Pike's face went white. "You're lying." "Am I? Then why are you so nervous?" Isabel stepped closer, and in the firelight, she looked like an avenging angel. "Why has Blackwood been so desperate to buy my land? It's not the richest soil in the valley. It's not the best water rights. But it is the one piece of property that sits right in the middle of his fabricated claims." "That's enough," Pike snarled. His gun clearing leather point 2 shots rang out simultaneously, Garrett's and another from the darkness beyond the torchlight. Pike's gun flew from his hand, and he screamed, clutching his wrist. The second shot had come from the shadows, and now a figure emerged from the darkness, rifle in hand. "Evening, Sheriff," said a familiar voice. "Hope I'm not interrupting anything important." Isabel's heart leaped. It was Tom Becker, Samuel's old friend from the war, the one who'd helped her with the heavy work around the cabin. But he wasn't alone. Behind him came three more men, neighbors, fellow homesteaders, men who'd been pushed and pressed until they'd finally found their backbone. Tom, Morton said, his voice heavy with resignation. You boys don't want to get mixed up in this. Mixed up in what? In seeing justice done? In protecting a neighbor from thugs and thieves. Tom's rifle never wavered. Sheriff, I've known you for 15 years. Knew your daddy before you. He wouldn't recognize the man you've become. Morton's shoulders sagged. Tom, I got a job to do. So do we, said another voice from the darkness. And our job is protecting what's ours. More figures emerged from the shadows. Women and men, young and old, all carrying guns or farm tools or whatever weapons they could find. The homesteaders of the valley, the ones who'd been scattered and afraid, now standing together in the firelight. This is getting out of hand, Morton said, but his voice lacked conviction. You could see the calculation in his eyes. A dozen armed homesteaders against himself and two of Blackwood's men, one of whom was clutching a shattered wrist. No, Isabel said, her voice carrying clear across the clearing. This is justice, finally getting a fair chance. She pulled something from her coat, a leather portfolio, thick with papers. Sheriff, in here are documents that prove Cyrus Blackwood has been systematically stealing land from honest families. Survey reports, correspondence, even a few receipts for bribes paid to territorial officials. Everything you need to put him away for a long, long time. Morton stared at the portfolio like it was a snake. Miss Rosewood, I can't. You can, Tom said quietly. Question is, will you? Will you finally do the job you swore to do? Or will you keep taking Blackwood's money while honest folks suffer? The silence stretched long and tight. In the distance, the last of Isabel's cabin collapsed into itself with a shower of sparks, and the sound seemed to echo the death of something. Maybe innocence, maybe fear, maybe the old way of doing things, Sheriff. Morton looked at the portfolio, then at the faces surrounding him, then at his own hands. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. Give me the documents. Pike tried to protest, but his voice was weak from pain and shock. The other homesteaders moved closer, their weapons ready but not threatening. Yet, Isabel handed over the portfolio, and Morton opened it with trembling fingers. In the torchlight, she could see his face change as he read. Surprise, then understanding, then something like anger. Jesus Christ, he whispered. Jesus Christ, what have I done? You've done what you had to do to survive, Garrett said quietly. Question is, what are you going to do now? Morton looked up, and in his eyes was something that hadn't been there before. Resolve, maybe, or the first stirring of the man he used to be. I'm going to arrest Cyrus Blackwood, he said, and I'm going to need witnesses. But as the words left his mouth, the sound of approaching hoofbeats thundered through the night. Not the measured pace of lawmen, but the desperate rhythm of men, running from something far worse than justice. The riders came like a storm front, dark shapes against the firelit sky, their horses' hooves pounding out a rhythm that spoke of desperation and dangerous men with nothing left to lose. At their head rode Cyrus Blackwood himself, his expensive coat billowing behind him like the wings of some great predatory bird. Well, Blackwood called out as he reined in his horse at the edge of the clearing. Quite the gathering we have here. Sheriff Morton, I trust you've completed your duties? Morton's hand tightened on the leather portfolio, and you could see the war playing out across his weathered face. Years of taking orders battling against the first stirrings of conscience. Mr. Blackwood, I think we need to have a conversation. Indeed, we do. Blackwood's voice carried the smooth confidence of a man who'd never doubted his own power, especially about the documents Miss Rosewood seems to have acquired. The word hung in the air like a threat. Isabel felt Garrett shift beside her, his hand resting easy on his gun, but she could sense the coiled tension in his body, the readiness to spring into action. Around them, the homesteaders stood their ground, their faces hard in the flickering torchlight. You mean the documents that prove you've been stealing land from honest families? Isabel stepped forward, her voice carrying clear across the clearing. The ones that show your surveyors redrawing boundaries to suit your needs? Or perhaps the receipts for bribes you've paid to territorial officials? Blackwood's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Miss Rosewood, you've always had such a vivid imagination. Perhaps the stress of losing your Home has affected your judgment. My judgment's fine, she shot back. It's your conscience that seems to be missing. Conscience. Blackwood laughed, but there was no humor in it. My dear woman, conscience is a luxury for those who can afford it. In business, sentiment is simply another word for failure. Behind him, his men spread out in a loose semicircle, their hands resting on their weapons. You could smell the tension in the air, thick as smoke, could feel the moment balanced on a knife's edge between words and violence. Sheriff, Blackwood continued, his voice taking on a harder edge, I believe you have something that belongs to me. These documents don't belong to you, Morton said, his voice stronger now, more certain. They belong to the people of this valley, the people whose land you've been stealing. Stealing? Blackwood's eyebrows rose in mock surprise. I prefer to think of it as aggressive negotiation. After all, what good is land to people who lack the vision to develop it properly? The vision to develop it. Tom Becker's voice cut through the night like a blade. Or the money to buy off officials and falsify surveys. Careful, Mr. Becker, Blackwood said, his smile turning predatory. Accusations like that can be costly. Is that a threat? Garrett's voice was quiet, but it carried the promise of violence. Because if you're threatening honest folks, we're going to have a problem. Blackwood's gaze shifted to Garrett, and for the first time, his confidence seemed to waver. Mr. Stoneheart, I'm surprised to find you here. This hardly seems like your sort of entertainment. My sort of entertainment is seeing justice done, Garrett replied. And right now, justice looks like seeing you in chains. Justice? Blackwood laughed again, but this time it sounded forced. Justice is what I make it. Justice is what I can afford, and I can afford quite a lot. He gestured to his men, and they began to close in, their weapons now clearly visible. But the homesteaders didn't back down. If anything, they seemed to grow stronger, their resolve hardening like steel in a forge. You know what your problem is, Blackwood, Isabel said, her voice cutting through the tension like a church bell. You think everything has a price. You think every man can be bought, every principle can be compromised. Can't they? Blackwood's smile returned, cold and calculating. Sheriff Morton certainly seems to think so. Don't you, Sheriff? All eyes turned to Morton, and you could see the moment of truth arriving like a thunderclap. The sheriff looked at the portfolio in his hands, then at Blackwood's expectant face, then at the homesteaders surrounding him. Mr. Blackwood, Morton said quietly, you're under arrest. The words fell into the silence like stones into still water, sending ripples of shock through both sides. Blackwood's face went white, then red, then something approaching purple. You can't be serious, he snarled. Do you have any idea what this will cost you? Do you know what I can do to you? I know what you've already done, Morton replied, his voice growing stronger with each word. I know about the bribes, the falsified surveys, the families you've destroyed. And I know it ends tonight. Like hell it does. Blackwood's hand dropped to his gun, but he wasn't the only one moving. Clearing erupted into chaos. Guns blazed in the darkness, muzzle flashes painting the night in stark relief. Horses screamed and reared, men shouted and cursed, and through it all, the smell of gunpowder mixed with the lingering scent of smoke from Isabel's burned cabin. Garrett threw himself in front of Isabel, his gun barking twice as one of Blackwood's men tried to bring his rifle to bear. Tom Becker's shotgun boomed like thunder, and suddenly 2 more of Blackwood's hired guns were down, clutching wounded shoulders. The trees, Garrett shouted, grabbing Isabel's hand and pulling her toward the cover of the pines. Get to the trees. They ran through the maze of gunfire, Garrett's body shielding hers, his free hand blazing away at anyone who tried to stop them. Behind them, the homesteaders fought like men defending their very souls, their weapons speaking the language of righteous fury, but Blackwood wasn't finished. As Garrett and Isabel reached the tree line, the land baron appeared through the smoke. Like a demon from hell, his expensive coat torn and bloodied, his gun trained on Isabel's heart. You should have taken my offer, he snarled, his face twisted with rage. You should have sold when you had the chance. I'll never sell to you, Isabel said, her voice steady despite the gun pointed at her chest. Not my land, not my soul, not my principles. Then you'll die with them, Blackwood said, his finger tightening on the trigger. The shot rang out, but it wasn't Blackwood's gun that fired. Sheriff Morton stood 30 feet away, his smoking pistol in his hand, his face grim with the weight of what he'd done. Blackwood looked down at the spreading red stain on his shirt, then up at Morton's face. You shot me. I enforced the law, Morton replied. Something I should have done a long time ago. Blackwood fell to his knees, then onto his side, his breath coming in short gasps. The fight seemed to go out of his men all at once there, weapons lowering as they realized their boss was done for. It's over, Morton called out to the clearing. Drop your weapons. It's over. One by one, Blackwood's remaining men threw down their guns. The homesteaders emerged from cover, their faces showing the strain of the fight, but also something else. Hope. Maybe, or the first stirrings of justice finally being served. Isabel knelt beside Blackwood, her face a mixture of anger and something that might have been pity. Why? She asked. Why did you do it? Why steal from families who had nothing? Blackwood's eyes were growing glassy, but he managed a bitter smile. Because I could, he whispered. Because power is the only thing that matters in this world. No, Isabel said quietly. Love matters. Community matters. Standing up for what's right matters. But Blackwood was beyond hearing. His eyes fixed on something in the distance. Perhaps the flames still flickering in the ruins of her cabin. Perhaps. Something only he could see. Then the breath left his body, and Cyrus Blackwood's reign of terror in the valley was over. Garrett helped Isabel to her feet, his arms coming around her in a gesture that was both protective and tender. Are you hurt? No, she said, but her voice was shaking. No, I'm fine. We're all fine. She looked around the clearing at the faces of her neighbors, at the men and women who'd stood up to tyranny and won. Sheriff Morton was helping tend to the wounded, his face showing the first signs of the man he used to be. Tom Becker was organizing. The others, making sure everyone was accounted for. What happens now? She asked, Garrett's arms tightened around her. Now we rebuild. We make this valley what it was meant to be. A place where honest folks can make an honest living, where families can put down roots and grow. And us. The question slipped out before she could stop it, but she didn't regret asking. What happens? To us. Garrett was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the dying flames of her cabin. When he spoke, his voice was gentle but sure. Well, you'll need a new place to live. And I happen to know a rancher who's got more space than he knows what to do with. Assuming, of course, that you'd be interested in sharing it with him. Isabel looked up at his face, saw the hope and uncertainty there, saw the man who'd walked through fire for her asking for nothing more than the chance to build something beautiful from the ashes. I might be interested, she said, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. Assuming he doesn't mind a woman who's not afraid to fight for what's right. Ma'am, Garrett said, his own smile breaking through like sunrise, I wouldn't have you any other way. But as they stood there in the ruins of the old life, watching the last flames die down to embers, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows, or the glint of metal in the moonlight as a gun was slowly raised. The shot came from the darkness like a whisper of death, but Tom Becker's sharp eyes had caught the glint of metal in the moonlight. His warning shout split the night just as Pike, bloodied and desperate, thought dead but clinging to life and vengeance, pulled the trigger with his good hand. The bullet meant for Isabel's heart found only air as Garrett threw himself sideways, carrying her to the ground in a tangle of limbs and flowing skirts. Pike's second shot went wide as Tom's rifle spoke with authority, and suddenly the last of Blackwood's men was truly finished, his weapon falling from nerveless fingers. Son of a bitch just wouldn't stay down, Tom muttered, checking his rifle. As he approached Pike's still form. Some folks just don't know when they're beat. Garrett helped Isabel to her feet, his hands gentle but thorough as he checked her for injuries. You hurt anywhere? Only my pride, she said, brushing dirt from her singed dress. Seems I can't go 5 minutes without you saving my life. Well, ma'am, Garrett said, his smile warm enough to melt winter. I reckon I could get used to it. Sheriff. Morton approached them, his face showing the weight of the night's events, but also something else. Relief, maybe, or the peace that comes from finally doing what's right. Miss Rosewood, I owe you an apology. I should have listened sooner. You listened when it mattered, Isabel replied. That's what counts. Morton nodded, then looked around the clearing where the homesteaders were tending to the wounded and securing the remaining prisoners. What do we do now? With Blackwood dead and his men scattered, There's going to be questions. Territorial officials, railroad investigators, let them come, said a new voice from the edge of the clearing. Judge Harrison emerged from the shadows, his white hair gleaming in the torchlight, his weathered face grim but determined. I've been riding hard since I got word of what was happening. Took me 3 hours to get here from Salvation Creek. Judge, Morton said, relief evident in his voice. Thank God you're here. I should have been here sooner, Harrison replied, his gaze taking in the scene. The bodies, the scattered weapons, the faces of people who'd fought for their very survival. I've been investigating Blackwood's activities for months, ever since. Complaints started reaching the territorial capital. If I'd acted faster. You're here now, Isabel said firmly. That's what matters. Judge Harrison nodded, then gestured to the leather portfolio that Morton still clutched. Are those the documents Miss Rosewood mentioned in her letter? Letter? Garrett asked, raising an eyebrow. Isabel's cheeks colored slightly. I may have. Written to Judge Harrison last month, asking for help. I didn't mention it because I wasn't sure he'd received it, or if he'd believe me. I received it, Harrison said, and I believed every word. Miss Rosewood, your evidence, combined with what I've already gathered, will put an end to this corruption once and for all. The railroad will have to honor the original land grants, and any property stolen through falsified surveys will be returned to its rightful owners. A cheer went up from the homesteaders, and you could see hope blooming on their faces like flowers. After rain, men who'd been beaten down and scattered were standing tall again. Women who'd feared for their children's future were smiling through their tears. What about the railroad? Tom asked. They'll just send someone else, won't they? Perhaps, Judge Harrison admitted. But they'll have to deal with legal surveys this time, and fair prices. The days of theft and intimidation are over in this valley. As the crowd began to disperse, neighbors helping neighbors, Sheriff Morton organizing the cleanup, Isabel found herself standing with Garrett at the edge of what had been her home. The cabin was nothing but ash and charred timbers. Now, but somehow it didn't hurt as much as she'd expected. Regrets? Garrett asked softly. Isabel considered the question, looking at the ruins of her old life. Some, she said finally. I'll miss the memories Samuel and I made here. The plans we had, the dreams we shared. And now, she turned to face him, this man who'd walked through fire for her, who'd stood with her against corruption and evil, who'd offered her not just shelter but partnership, respect, love. Now I think it's time for new dreams. Garrett's smile could have lit up the entire valley. I was hoping you'd say that. He reached into his coat and pulled out something small and glinting, a simple gold band, worn smooth by years of wear. This was my mother's ring. She gave it to my father the day they decided to build a life together. Said it was a symbol of two people choosing to be stronger together than they ever could be apart. Isabel's breath caught. Garrett, I know it's been one hell of a night, he said, his voice gentle but sure. I know we've barely had time to get acquainted proper, but I also know that sometimes life doesn't wait for perfect timing. Sometimes you have to grab hold of happiness when it comes, because you never know when the chance might pass. He dropped to one knee right there in the ashes of her old life, the ring glinting in the firelight. Isabel Rosewood, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Would you help me build something beautiful on this land, something that'll last for generations to come? Around them, the last of the flames from her cabin died down to glowing embers, but somehow the night seemed brighter than ever. Isabel looked at this man who'd proven himself in every way that mattered, who'd shown her that love could be both gentle and fierce, that a man could be both strong and tender. Yes, she said, her voice carrying clear across the valley. Yes, I'll marry you, Garrett Stoneheart. He slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, as if it had been waiting all these years to find its home. Then he stood and kissed her, and it was everything a first kiss should be, soft and sweet and full of promise. The homesteaders who remained cheered. Tom Becker whistled loud enough to wake the dead, and even Sheriff Morton cracked a smile. But for Isabel and Garrett, the rest of the world had faded away, leaving just the two of them and the future stretching out before them like an uncharted country. So, Garrett said when they finally broke apart, what do you say we head back? To my place? Your place now, I suppose. Our place. Our place, Isabel repeated, liking the sound of it. I like that. As they walked toward Garrett's horse, toward their horse, toward their new life together. Judge Harrison called out to them. Miss Rosewood, Mr. Stoneheart, I'll need you both to testify at the territorial hearing next month. Your evidence will help ensure this kind of corruption doesn't take root anywhere else. We'll be there, Isabel called back. Both of us. Together, Garrett added, and squeezed her hand. They rode through the valley in the pre-dawn darkness, past the homesteads that would now be safe, past the fields that would bloom again, past the creek that would run clean and free. Behind them, the last of the flames died to ash, but ahead of them, the eastern sky was beginning to show the first hint of dawn. Tell me about your ranch, Isabel said, settling more comfortably against Garrett's chest. Our ranch. Well, he said, his voice warm with contentment. There's a big house with more rooms than one man knows what to do with. There's good grazing land, a creek that never runs dry, and the prettiest view in the territory. But you know what it's been missing? What's that? Life, he said simply. Family. Love. The sound of children laughing, of a woman humming while she works. It's been a house, but not a home. Isabel smiled, already imagining it. Roses growing by the front door, a vegetable garden behind the house, maybe a swing hanging from the old oak tree she could see in the distance. A place where love could grow and flourish, where justice and fairness weren't just words, but ways of life. Sounds perfect, she said. It will be, Garrett replied, now that you're coming home with me. As they rode toward the sunrise, toward their new life together, the valley behind them began to stir with the sounds of renewal. Hammers would ring again, seeds would be planted, children would play in yards that were finally safe. From the ashes of corruption and fear, something beautiful was growing. Not just love between two people, but hope for an entire community. And in the east, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, the sun rose on a new day in a valley finally free. Well, now, if that tale of fire and love didn't warm your heart like a good cup of coffee on a cold morning, I don't know what will. Don't forget to tip your hat to love and justice in the comments below. And if you're hungry for more stories of courage and romance in the wild frontier, make sure to subscribe for the next adventure. Speaking of adventures, drop a comment and let us know where in this wide world you're watching from today. Whether it's from a bustling city or a quiet country town, we'd love to hear from you, partner.